Evan Marshall had always been the kind of leader who believed he understood his company from top to bottom. After all, he had built it from a small startup in a spare room to a fast-growing business with hundreds of employees. But as the company expanded, he began hearing stories that bothered him. Some customers complained that their issues were handled poorly. A few employees hinted that certain supervisors treated people unfairly. And productivity numbers in some departments did not match the reports being submitted. Evan wanted to believe it. It was all a misunderstanding or something that could be fixed with better training. But a quiet thought kept returning to him. What if something was happening behind his back? He didn't want to rely only on upper management explanations anymore. He needed to see things with his own eyes. One evening, after most people had gone home, Evan sat alone in his office, staring at the dim lights of the city outside. His mind kept circling the same idea that seemed strange, even a little crazy. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "What if I go in as someone else?" He imagined himself working quietly among the staff, hearing how they spoke to one another, seeing how they treated customers, watching how supervisors handled problems. It would give him the truth without filters, without people trying to impress the CEO. By midnight, the decision was made. He would do it. The next week, Evan prepared everything. He created a new identity, Evan Carter, a junior-level contractor hired temporarily to help in the customer support division. He cut his hair shorter, grew light facial stubble, wore simple glasses, and chose clothes that would not draw attention. Instead of the confident CEO suit and polished shoes, he wore average jeans, a plain shirt, and old sneakers. Even people who knew him well would have to look twice. Only one person in the entire company knew the plan, a trusted friend outside the workplace who helped him practice how to act less like a CEO and more like a new hire trying to find his footing. Evan knew he had to be careful. If anyone recognized him, the whole plan would fall apart. On Monday morning, Evan walked through the company doors like any other new contractor. It felt strange not to head toward the executive floor where his office was. Instead, he followed the signs toward the training room where new workers gathered. As he walked through the hall, no one paid him any special attention. No greetings of good morning, sir. No nervous smiles. No sudden straightening of posture. For the first time in years, he blended in. The feeling was both freeing and unsettling. When he entered the training room, a small group of new hires sat in chairs arranged in a circle. Some looked nervous, others excited. Evan sat quietly at the back. A coordinator walked in and began explaining the basics of the job. Evan listened like everyone else, taking notes, asking simple questions, just doing his best not to sound too experienced. As training went on, he noticed how people talked. A few were friendly and helpful, whispering advice or making light jokes to ease the tension. Others seemed uninterested or annoyed at small things. He observed every detail, not judging, just collecting the truth. After an hour, the coordinator said, "You'll all be assigned to your teams shortly. Your supervisors will show you the systems and walk you through your duties." Evan felt a quiet knot in his stomach. This was the moment he would enter the heart of the company as someone invisible. His assignment was the customer support division, a department he had been most concerned about. Several complaints had originated there. He made his way to the department floor, a large room filled with desks, computers, and people talking into headsets. As he stepped inside, nobody turned to look. Everyone was busy with calls, typing responses, or rushing between desks. A woman at the front desk welcomed him with a friendly smile and directed him to the team supervisor, a man named Malcolm. Malcolm was in his late 40s, tall, with a sharp tone to his voice and a permanent frown on his face. He barely looked up when Evan introduced himself. "You're the new contractor? Sit there," he said, pointing to a desk without lifting his eyes from his screen. Evan nodded politely and took his seat. He expected at least a small welcome or a basic overview. Instead, Malcolm slid a few pages toward him and said, "Read these." They explained the basics. After that, just follow what others do. Evan quietly took the papers, though he had read dozens of versions of these instructions over the years. Still, he acted like he was seeing them for the first time. The first few hours passed slowly. Evan watched how people responded to customer calls and messages. Many worked hard and treated customers with patience. But he also saw a few who seemed irritated, bored, or careless. One employee ended a call by rolling his eyes and muttering, "Some people just don't know simple things." Another ignored a customer complaint entirely. Marking it as resolved without checking the issue, Evan felt a small ache in his chest. This wasn't how he wanted customers to be treated. Later that morning, a young associate named Sophia approached him. She had a warm, calm way of speaking. "Hey, you must be the new contractor," she said with a gentle smile. "If you need help with the system, just let me know." It's a little confusing at first. Evan appreciated her kindness. "Thanks," he said, keeping his voice soft and humble. "I'm still trying to understand everything." She spent a few minutes showing him how to navigate the software, explaining it in simple steps. Her patience stood out. She treated him like a teammate, not a burden. Meanwhile, Malcolm occasionally glanced their way, and every time he did, his expression tightened slightly. It was clear he didn't like the idea of employees helping each other without his direction. During lunch break, Evan sat alone at first, observing how the staff interacted. Some grouped together based on experience, some based on personalities, and some simply sat quietly on their own. No one recognized him, not even those who had seen the CEO from afar during company events. His disguise was working. Sophia eventually walked over and asked, "Mind if I sit here?" "Of course," Evan said. They talked casually about the job, the training, the team, and daily life. Evan asked simple questions and listened more than he spoke. When he gently asked, "How is it working under your supervisor?" Sophia paused. She glanced around before answering softly, "It depends on the day. He can be strict, sometimes too strict, but I try to stay out of trouble and focus on my work." Then she smiled again, as if brushing off the worry. Evan nodded slowly. He made sure not to push further. The last thing he wanted was to make her uncomfortable. But her hesitation said more than her words. After lunch, Evan returned to his desk as the workload picked up. Phones rang nonstop. Messages poured in. The pressure was clear in the room. While some employees handled the stress well, others took shortcuts. Evan quietly observed everything. At one point, he approached Malcolm to ask a simple question about a customer case. Malcolm didn't hide his irritation. "Didn't you read the guide?" He snapped. "I did, but this situation seems a bit different," Evan said gently. Malcolm sighed loudly, as if the question was a personal burden. "Just do what I said. Don't think too much." Evan thanked him and went back to work. He noticed that several team members flinched whenever Malcolm raised his voice, even the slightest bit. Some avoided asking him questions altogether, choosing instead to guess their way through tasks. By late afternoon, Evan had seen enough to understand that the department had good people, but lacked proper leadership. The mood, the tension, the way some employees shrank back while others grew defensive, it all pointed to deeper issues. When the workday finally ended, Evan walked out of the building feeling heavier than he expected. He had only been undercover for one day, yet he had already seen things that confirmed his concerns. But he also saw hope in employees like Sophia and a few others who treated people with honesty and care as he headed toward the parking lot. He reminded himself that this was just the beginning. If he wanted the complete truth, the real truth, he would need to stay in disguise longer, observe more, and find out what was happening behind the reports and numbers. He climbed into his car, removed his glasses, and let out a slow breath. He was ready for whatever came next. The truth was out there, hidden between conversations, quiet actions, and small moments. And he was determined to uncover it not as a CEO looking down from an office, but as an ordinary worker standing among everyone else. Tomorrow, he would return as Evan Carter, and the real test would begin. The next morning, Evan arrived at the company early, long before most employees came in. He parked farther from the building to avoid familiar looks from staff who might have noticed his car before. The sky was still dim. The cool morning air helped clear his mind. As he walked toward the entrance, He reminded himself to stay fully in character. He was not the CEO today. He was simply Evan Carter, a new contractor just trying to learn the job. Inside, the building was quiet. Only a few lights were on. The security guard at the front desk greeted him with a small nod, not recognizing him at all. It was strange how easy it was to disappear when people expected nothing from you. Evan made his way to the customer support floor. The room was almost empty, except for one employee who always arrived early. Evan had seen him the day before, but had not spoken to him. The young man looked deeply focused. Reviewing customer cases before the shift officially began, Evan admired his dedication. He settled at his desk and opened the computer system. He knew the tools better than anyone, yet he moved slowly, pretending to learn. Clicking carefully through each page, as the room gradually filled, he quietly watched people entering. Some came in with tired faces, others chatting lightly about their morning routines. A few walked in at the last minute, rushing to their chairs before the clock marked them late. Then, as expected, Malcolm entered. His steps were sharp, and his eyes scanned the room as if searching for something wrong. Some employees immediately straightened their posture. Others lowered their heads. Evan kept his expression calm and neutral. Malcolm stopped by Evan's desk. "Today, I want you handling simple cases. Don't touch anything complicated. If something looks confusing, pass it to someone else. We don't need mistakes." His tone implied he expected mistakes. Evan nodded politely. "Understood."
Malcolm walked away,
he added, and no wasting time asking too many questions. "We need speed here." Evan kept his voice steady. "I'll do my best." When Malcolm left, Evan heard a quiet breath from the employee sitting 2 desks away. It was the kind of breath someone lets out when tension finally passes. Soon the day began. Calls started coming in, messages filled the queue, and the room buzzed with the usual noise of work. Evan watched closely. Taking notes in his mind, he saw employees who cared deeply about doing things correctly, patiently guiding customers step by step. He also saw some who rushed through tasks, often skipping important details. One worker even muted a customer mid-sentence and whispered under his breath, "Not dealing with this again." Before marking the issue as solved, Evan felt a small tightening in his chest. That customer would call again, frustrated and unheard. He watched interactions, not with judgment, but with understanding. These people were under pressure, some with too much workload and too little guidance. The problem was bigger than individuals. It was about leadership, and he was here to understand exactly how deep it went. Around mid-morning, Sophia walked over with her friendly smile. "Hey, how's your second day going?" she asked. Evan smiled back. "Still learning. Thanks again for yesterday." She waved a hand as if it was nothing. "Everyone needs help when they start. If you get stuck with anything today, just come find me." Her warmth and sincerity stood out in a place that felt tense more often than not. Before she left, she lowered her voice a little. "Just be careful around him today. He seems in a mood." She tilted her head slightly in Malcolm's direction. Evan nodded. "I noticed," as the morning hours passed. Evan took on simple cases as instructed. But every now and then, he pretended to be confused so he could observe how Malcolm reacted to employees seeking help. It didn't take long to confirm something. Evan suspected Malcolm only helped when he felt it made him look good. If the request seemed minor or inconvenient, he dismissed it. If an employee needed real guidance, he often responded sharply. At one point, an older employee approached Malcolm hesitantly. "I think this account might have the wrong details. Could you check something?" he asked. Malcolm didn't even turn his head. "I'm busy." "Figure it out." Employee quietly backed away, clearly embarrassed. Watching moments like these hurt Evan more than he expected. These were hard-working people who deserved respect. But one particular moment stood out. Near lunchtime, a complicated customer case appeared in the system queue. It involved a client who was renewing a service contract. The details were messy payment issues, system errors, and incorrect dates. Evan noticed Malcolm looking at the case too. Instead of helping, Malcolm forwarded it directly to another employee with a note that read, "Fix this." Don't bother me unless it's an emergency. The employee, already struggling with several calls, looked overwhelmed. Evan approached him gently. Need help with anything? The man sighed. Honestly, yes. But I don't want to get in trouble. He doesn't like when we ask for help. Evan kept his voice soft. Maybe we can look at it together? The employee glanced around nervously but nodded. Evan walked him through the steps, guiding him slowly, letting him click through each page. Evan made sure not to take over completely. He wanted the man to feel confident. After about 15 minutes, the issue was fixed. The relieved look on the man's face was worth every second. Thanks, he said with genuine gratitude. I owe you one. Evan smiled. We're a team. We help each other. The man nodded, but the sadness in his eyes revealed something deeper. He wasn't used to hearing that later. During lunch, Evan sat again with Sophia. She brought her lunch in a small container and ate calmly. Even though the room was filled with noise and chatter, how long have you been working here? Evan asked. Almost 3 years, she replied. I like the job. I like solving problems. But some days are harder than others. Is it the workload? He asked gently. Well, that too, she said, smiling softly. But mostly the way some people are treated. It affects the whole mood. Evan nodded thoughtfully. He admired how carefully she chose her words. She wasn't the type to gossip or complain without reason. She simply told the truth as kindly as possible. She continued, a lot of us want to do better. But when you're afraid to ask questions, it slows everything down. Evan could feel how much she cared. She wanted a positive workplace, not just for herself, but for everyone. After lunch, the pace of work picked up again. Calls came in non-stop. The pressure grew, and Evan noticed small patterns. Employees talked among themselves, sharing concerns in whispers. They avoided approaching Malcolm except when absolutely necessary. Every time he walked by, the energy in the room shifted. One situation stood out as the clearest sign of the problem. A new employee sitting near Evan accidentally assigned a case to the wrong category. It was an easy mistake, one that could be fixed in seconds. But Malcolm noticed. He marched straight to the young employee's desk. What are you doing? He said loudly. The entire room fell silent. I just clicked the wrong option, the new employee said quietly. Malcolm's voice grew sharper. Wrong option? Do you know what that mistake could cause? Do you even know what you're doing here? The young worker's hands shook slightly. Before the situation escalated further, Sophia stepped in gently. It's okay. I can help correct it, she said softly. Malcolm glared at her but didn't argue. Instead, he turned away abruptly. The moment he left, the tension broke. The new employee whispered a shaky thank you. Sophia gave him a reassuring smile. Everyone makes mistakes. Don't worry. Evan watched the interaction closely. This was what leadership should look like: support, patience, understanding. But it wasn't coming from the person in charge. It was coming from regular staff who were simply trying to help each other. The rest of the afternoon flowed with similar moments, some uplifting, some troubling. Evan stayed quiet, absorbing everything. By the time the shift ended, Evan felt mentally exhausted. Not from the work itself, but from seeing how much weight people carried every day. He walked out slowly, thinking deeply. As he reached the parking lot, he paused and looked back at the building. Inside those walls were hardworking people, doing their best under pressure, many without proper guidance. The truth was becoming clearer, and he knew he had to keep going. Tomorrow, he would come back again as Evan Carter, and with each day, he would learn more about the hidden layers of the place he thought he knew so well. The journey had only begun. Evan woke up early the next morning with a heavy but determined feeling in his chest. The first 2 days had shown him more than he expected, and he knew the real challenges were still ahead. He needed to understand everything the staff dealt with, not just the surface-level issues. So he reminded himself again. Today, he was not the CEO. Today, he was simply Evan Carter, a contractor trying to do his job. When he arrived at the building, the lobby was already buzzing with people. Some walked quickly, already stressed before the day even began. Others chatted in small groups, laughing softly to lighten the morning mood. Evan quietly blended in with the crowd. Keeping his head down, once he reached the customer support floor, he noticed the exact moment when Malcolm entered the room. It was hard to miss. A silence spread through the area like a quiet wave. People sat straighter. A few quickly minimized screens, afraid he might question their work. It amazed Evan how one person's presence could change the entire atmosphere. Evan took his seat and logged into the system. He wanted to keep a low profile, but he also knew he needed to dig deeper into how things truly worked. Today he planned to follow cases closely, especially the complicated ones. Those were usually where mistakes were hidden and where leadership mattered most. Within minutes, messages poured in. One message in particular caught Evan's eye. It was a renewal contract for a long-term client, a case similar to the one he helped fix the day before. The contract had several issues flagged in red: missing signatures, mismatched dates, billing errors, and something that looked like altered numbers. He hesitated. Malcolm disliked when anyone asked questions, but this case needed proper handling. If not done correctly, it could cause real trouble for the company. Evan clicked on the case and carefully reviewed each detail. Something felt off. The numbers didn't match the company's usual patterns. The timing of changes didn't make sense. Someone had edited parts of the contract, but the edits looked rushed, almost careless. While he was studying the contract, Malcolm suddenly appeared beside him. "What are you doing?" Malcolm asked sharply. Evan kept his voice calm. Looking at this renewal case, there seemed to be some inconsistencies. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. He snatched the mouse from Evan's hand and clicked through the file quickly. "You don't need to worry about this one. I'll handle it." He closed the window abruptly. Evan blinked in surprise. "I can help if you want." "I just thought you thought wrong," Malcolm cut in. "Stick to simple tasks like you were told. This case doesn't concern you?" Evan nodded slowly, though inside he felt a quiet spark of suspicion. Why was Malcolm so quick to hide the document? Why did he not want anyone else touching it? For the next hour, he watched Malcolm from a distance. Every so often, Malcolm opened the contract again, typing rapidly, changing numbers, then switching screens when someone walked by. His shoulders tensed each time. His eyes darted around even when he thought no one was looking. Evan's suspicion deepened. Something was definitely wrong. Still, he reminded himself not to jump to conclusions. He needed more proof, more understanding. So he continued with his tasks, observing quietly. Before long, another interesting situation arose. One of the customer accounts had a pending complaint that required follow-up. But instead of resolving it, another employee marked it as completed without taking any action. Evan approached him gently. "Hey, is everything okay with that case?" he asked. The employee sighed. "Honestly, no. But Malcolm doesn't want us spending too much time on complaints. He says to close anything that looks minor." "That sounds risky," Evan said. The man shook his head. "Tell me about it." "But if we don't do it, he says we're being slow. And slow means warnings." Evan took note. This explained why customer complaints had been rising. People weren't lazy, they were scared. As the morning went on, he noticed similar patterns. Documents rushed. Reports adjusted. Questions avoided. People afraid of making Malcolm angry. And most importantly, more signs that something deeper was wrong with the contract Malcolm had tried to hide. Midway through the day, the unexpected happened. While Malcolm was away from his desk, a new message popped up on the system, an automatic alert showing the contract had been updated again. Since Evan had been looking at the case earlier, the alert also appeared on his screen. His heart thumped. He opened it quickly, and there it was. The contract numbers had changed. Drastically, so drastically that the client would either be overcharged or undercharged, depending on how the system processed the data. The billing dates were adjusted to in a way that didn't follow company rules. It looked like someone was trying to hide a mistake they made earlier. Evan leaned closer, reading the version history. One line confirmed everything. Only one person had edited the file, Malcolm. Evan's stomach sank. This wasn't just poor leadership. This was misconduct. Just then, he heard footsteps approaching. He quickly minimized the window before Malcolm reached the aisle. Malcolm returned to his desk, unaware that Evan had seen everything. But Evan didn't want to act impulsively. He needed the whole picture. So he kept observing, waiting for more clues. Later in the afternoon, the situation escalated when the system flagged the contract for supervisor approval. That meant Malcolm had to finalize everything soon. And if he approved it with all the errors, the client would be charged wrongly and possibly canceled the entire partnership. Evan knew he couldn't let that happen, still in disguise. He approached Malcolm calmly. "I noticed the renewal contract might need extra review," he said gently. Malcolm stared at him in disbelief. "Are you seriously bringing this up again?" "I just don't want something to go wrong," Evan replied. Malcolm laughed coldly. "You think you know more than me? You've been here 3 days. It's not about that," Evan said softly. "It's just..." Malcolm stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully. You are a temporary contractor. You do what you're told. You don't question me. And if you keep sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, don't expect to last long here." Evan nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He wanted Malcolm to think he had backed down, but in truth, he had seen enough. After Malcolm walked away, Evan reopened the file quietly and saved a copy of the version history. He didn't alter anything. He simply made sure the record of changes wouldn't disappear. He also took note of timestamps, instructions sent through messages, and assignments Malcolm hid from others. By late afternoon, Evan's desk felt heavy with the weight of everything he had discovered. He didn't know whether to feel angry or disappointed. He had hoped the problems were just misunderstandings. But this was deliberate. Before the shift ended, one more thing happened. A notification came through the system. Asterisk supervisor meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Review required. Asterisk Evan knew exactly what it meant. Malcolm planned to finalize the contract the next day. And based on everything Evan saw, Malcolm would try to blame someone else if anything went wrong, possibly him. As he left the building that evening, Evan walked slower than usual. His disguise may have fooled everyone, but inside he felt the full weight of responsibility. He couldn't let the company lose a client because of someone's dishonesty, but he also wanted to protect the good employees who deserved better. On the drive home, he thought about every detail. The altered numbers, the missing signature, the blame shifting, the fear in the employee's eyes. The problem was no longer small, it was a sign of something bigger. Tomorrow's meeting could change everything, and if Malcolm planned to use that meeting to cover his tracks, Evan would be ready. He had the truth now, and the truth would finally be brought into the light the morning after the surprise call. The office felt different, even though nothing had physically changed. People still walked in with their coffee cups. The printers still made the same humming sound, and the light from the big windows still warmed the room. But there was something in the air, something unsettled. It was like everyone felt a small shift without knowing why. He was there before most employees arrived, still wearing the simple clothes he had been using for his undercover role. He sat alone at the small break room table, stirring a cup of tea he hadn't taken a sip of. His mind wasn't calm. He kept replaying the voice on the phone, the words, the tone, the certainty. It made him wonder how far the problem really went. When the office finally started filling up, he watched people quietly. Some greeted him with warm smiles. Some didn't look at him at all. Some seemed too busy to pay attention. But the ones he was watching closely were the ones who didn't know who he truly was. He tried to focus on the normal tasks. He assigned him that day organizing files, filling in data sheets, checking old records. But his thoughts drifted again and again. The call had made things real in a way nothing else had. It wasn't just about work ethics anymore. It wasn't even just about loyalty. It was about integrity and what was happening behind closed doors. Around noon, he noticed someone acting strangely. One of the supervisors kept walking back and forth between her office and the hallway, checking her phone, glancing around as if expecting something. She wasn't normally tense, He had observed her for days, and she usually walked with confidence. Today she looked uneasy. He kept his distance but stayed alert. Later that afternoon, he caught her whispering to another staff member. Their conversation was quick, rushed, and ended the second they noticed him walking by. Their eyes followed him until he turned the corner. That was when he realized something important. Someone inside the company already knew something was happening. Maybe not the whole truth. Maybe not his disguise. But something later, when he stepped outside for a moment to breathe, he saw the supervisor again. She was on the phone, speaking in a low tone. She didn't see him at first, but when she did, she froze for a second before forcing a smile. "Everything all right?" he asked casually. She nodded too quickly. "Yes, just handling a small issue." Her voice cracked slightly. It wasn't fear, he could tell, but more like worry mixed with irritation. He didn't push further. Not yet. After returning inside, he kept thinking about what he had seen. The timing, the tension, the phone call, it couldn't all be a coincidence. Something in the company was off balance, and people were trying to hide it as the day neared its end. He noticed another detail. The same staff member from the whispered hallway conversation was shredding documents. That wasn't unusual on its own, but the speed he was doing it, the way he kept checking the doorway, the nervous tapping of his foot, it all hit a strange note. He stood for a moment behind a stack of office supplies, watching. The man fed another paper through the shredder, glanced toward the hallway, and wiped sweat from his forehead. That's when he felt it again. That subtle but unmistakable feeling that people weren't acting out of routine. They were acting out of fear. When the workday finally ended, he stayed back longer than usual, pretending to finish a spreadsheet. But he wasn't really working. He was waiting. He waited until most people had left, until the office grew quiet, until the only sound was the soft buzz of overhead lights. Then he walked slowly toward the shredder. On top of it, stuck slightly in the feeder, was half of a torn paper that hadn't gone through all the way. He gently pulled it out. The print was faint, but he could read a few words enough to understand. This wasn't just some old leftover file. It was part of a contract. A contract he had never approved. A contract that carried his real signature, except he had never signed it. His heartbeat grew heavy. Loud in his ears, he stared at the torn sheet, turning it over in his hands. It didn't make sense. No one should have had access to his signature. No one should have been able to authorize a contract without him. And certainly no one should have been trying to destroy it. The weight of everything settled on him at once. The whispers, phone calls, the tension, the nervous shredding. Something bigger was happening, something far more dangerous than simple mismanagement. Someone was forging documents. Someone. Close. He slipped the half-shredded sheet into the notebook he carried and walked out of the office, locking the door behind him. Outside, the evening wind brushed against his face, but his thoughts were far from calm. As he walked toward the parking lot, he heard footsteps behind him. Not fast, not loud, but steady. Someone following? He didn't turn around right away. Instead, he slowed his pace slightly and listened. The footsteps slowed too. He sped up. The steps matched. He finally turned. A figure stood at a distance, partly hidden behind a row of cars. They froze when he saw them. He couldn't see their face clearly, but he could see their posture. Stiff. Uneasy. "Can I help you?" he called. The figure didn't answer. For a moment, the two stood in silence. Then the figure slowly stepped back, turned, and hurried away. He stayed still until the footsteps disappeared completely. He didn't chase. He didn't call out. Again, instead, he walked to his car with a steady breath and closed the door firmly behind him. He now had proof, even if only a piece of it, and someone knew he had found it. The contract wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a simple oversight. It was a warning. The night after he found the torn piece of the contract, he barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece everything together. The whispers in the hallway, the nervous shredding, supervisor's strange behavior, the unknown figure following him, all of it kept looping in his mind. By morning, he felt a mix of worry and determination. He knew he couldn't ignore any of this. Something serious was happening inside the company. He needed to uncover the truth before it was too late. He reached the office earlier than anyone else. The building was quiet, lights still off, only the soft hum of the security system filling the space. He unlocked the main door and walked through the empty hallways with steady steps. He wasn't the nervous undercover employee today. He walked with the mindset of someone who had a mission. Before he started the day as the disguised staff member, he needed to check one more thing. He headed to the archive room. It was a place where they stored old contracts, financial papers, and confidential files. The room was usually cool and dim. With rows of shelves filled with labeled boxes, he took out the notebook where he had hidden the half-shredded sheet. He held it under the light and studied the signature again. It was a perfect copy of his handwriting, same curve, same pressure, same pattern. Whoever forged it knew exactly what they were doing. He began to search through the boxes for the full contract. He checked the files from the current year, then the previous one, then the year before that. Nothing. Every hour, he looked deeper, more carefully, but still found nothing. That only confirmed his suspicion someone had already removed it. He closed one of the boxes slowly. If the contract isn't in the archives, he whispered to himself, then someone is hiding it. Just then, the door behind him creaked slightly. He turned quickly. It was the same supervisor from the day before. The one who had been whispering and making worried phone calls. She looked startled to see him in the archive room. "You're here early," she said. Her voice trembled a little. "Yeah," he replied calmly. "Just organizing some files." She nodded slowly. "Right, I was. Just checking something as well." But her eyes weren't on the shelves. They were on the notebook he had placed beside him. She stared at it for a second too long, then forced a smile and walked out. As soon as she left, he felt a chill run through him. She recognized something. Maybe the notebook, maybe the torn paper sticking out just a little. Whatever it was, her reaction confirmed that she knew more than she wanted to admit. Later in the morning, when the rest of the employees arrived, the atmosphere felt tense again. People seemed occupied with something other than their tasks. Whispered conversations, worried glances, subtle signals passed between desks. He noticed it all. He kept working silently at his assigned station, typing details into spreadsheets, organizing documents, pretending not to notice anything unusual. But inside his mind, everything was sharp and alert. Around noon, he overheard two senior employees talking in a closed meeting room. The door wasn't fully shut, and their voices leaked through. He should never have seen that contract. One whispered, "He's new," the other replied. How could he possibly know what it was? But still, we have to be careful. There's too much at stake. His breath caught for a moment. They were definitely talking about the document. He decided he couldn't keep doing this quietly. It was time to check the digital files. If the physical contract was missing, maybe the system held traces. During his break, he walked to one of the older computers in a corner of the office. Most employees didn't use it anymore because it was slow, but he knew it was still connected to the internal database. He logged in with the temporary employee credentials he'd been given. They didn't allow him access to everything, but he knew how to move around the system carefully. Checking pathways most people ignored, he searched for contracts by date, by project name, by department, even by signature. For a long time, nothing appeared. Then, something strange happened. A folder flashed on the screen for half a second, so fast anyone else would have missed it, but he caught it. It was a hidden directory, something only someone with deeper access could create. He clicked again, but it disappeared. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen. Someone high up was hiding things on purpose, and the moment he tried to look at it, the system shut him out. Suddenly, he heard footsteps approaching. He quickly minimized the windows and pretended to be checking staff schedules. A senior manager walked past him, pausing just long enough to glance at the monitor. "What are you doing on that computer?" The manager asked. "Oh," he said casually, "it froze when I was checking schedules. I'm restarting it now." The manager looked at him with narrowed eyes. Make sure you don't touch anything outside your scope. That system is sensitive." He nodded, keeping his face neutral. After the manager walked away, he felt something new, slow, growing certainty. These people weren't just hiding something, they were watching him. That evening, he left the office at his usual time, but he didn't go home. Instead, he drove around the block and parked where he could see the building. He turned off the engine and waited. An hour later, when most lights were off, two people entered through the side door, the same manager and the same supervisor. They weren't carrying bags or documents. They were empty-handed. He watched them disappear inside. After about 20 minutes, the lights in the archive room turned on. He felt a tightness in his chest. They were checking something, probably making sure he didn't find more. When the lights went off again, the two walked out quickly, speaking in low, hurried voices. One of them held a thin folder under their arm now. He leaned forward in his seat. That folder could very well be the full contract tour. Something even more important. He waited until they drove away before starting his car. He knew he had to act fast, but he also knew rushing would put him at risk. The next morning, he went to work as if nothing had happened. He greeted people with the same soft smile, did his tasks, and stayed quiet. But his mind was racing. He needed to get into that hidden folder. He needed access from a system that couldn't be tampered with. At the end of the day, he headed to the IT room. It was locked most of the time, but one of the junior technicians was leaving as he approached. "Forgot my phone," he said casually. "Mind if I step in for a second?" The technician held the door open for him, not thinking twice. Inside, he walked straight to the main server computer. It was old but powerful, running security systems and database storage. He felt his pulse quicken. He connected to the internal database and searched again. This time, he found the hidden directory. It was disguised behind random characters, but the timestamp gave it away. He opened it. Inside were scanned documents. Financial reports and multiple contracts, some with forged signatures, some with numbers that didn't make sense. And then he saw it. The full version of the contract. He had found in the shredder. He clicked it open as he scrolled. His heart sank. The contract wasn't just suspicious. It wasn't just unauthorized. It was a deal that would secretly divert a large amount of company money into a private account. But what shocked him the most was the signature below his forged name. It belonged to one of the people he trusted the most. Someone who had been with the company for years. Someone he never imagined would lie. The truth wasn't just coming out, it was unraveling. The moment he saw the name at the bottom of the forged contract, it felt like the floor beneath him shifted. He stared at the screen for a long time, unable to look away. His chest felt tight, almost like he couldn't breathe for a moment. Of all the people in the company, he'd never imagined this person would betray him. This was someone who had stood beside him through years of challenges, someone he trusted deeply, someone he believed would never cross such a line. He leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes for a few seconds, trying to calm his thoughts. His heart was beating too fast, and his mind was full of questions. Why would this person do this? When did it begin? How could something so big happen right under his nose? He looked at the contract again. The forged signature that copied his handwriting so perfectly, the confusing financial numbers that hid the truth. The hidden folder meant to stay buried forever. It was all intentional, carefully planned, quietly executed, and now he had proof. But proof alone wasn't enough. He needed to confront the truth. Face the people involved, make sure the company and the people who worked there honestly were protected. He copied the files onto a secured drive and slipped it into his pocket. When he left the IT room, he tried to look as calm as possible. The office was quieter than usual, though it was still working hours. He noticed a few employees watching him more closely than before. Some whispered softly to each other. Some avoided eye contact. He realized something else in that moment. The people involved had sensed. He was getting close. That meant he had less time than he thought. He went to the one place where no one would interrupt him, a small storage room near the back of the office. The room was dusty and dim, filled with old furniture that was no longer in use. He sat on a wooden chair and began writing everything down, every detail he had seen, every conversation he had overheard, every suspicious action he had witnessed. He wrote about the shredded documents, the whispered meetings, the hidden folder, the late-night visit to the archive room. He wrote about the forged contract and the signature that changed everything. Once he had everything recorded clearly, he took a deep breath and stood up. It was time. He left the storage room and walked straight to the main office where the senior leaders usually met. He entered without knocking. The room fell silent as soon as he stepped inside. They all looked up at him, some confused, some tense, some pretending to act normal. He placed the folder he carried on the table. "We need to talk," he said. There was a moment of quiet, and then one of them spoke. About what? He opened the folder and spread the printed documents across the table, the full contract. The numbers, the forged signature. The room went still. One of them swallowed hard. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. He could see the truth settling over them. "I think you all know what this is," he said in a steady voice. "And I want the truth." At first, no one spoke. They exchanged uneasy glances, trying to read one another. Then finally, one of them sighed and leaned forward. "You weren't supposed to see that," the person said softly. He felt anger rise inside him, but he kept his voice calm. "Why? Why would anyone go this far?" The answer didn't come easily. They hesitated, lowered their eyes, and finally began to explain. It had started as a small mistake, an error in accounting that should have been corrected. But instead of fixing it, someone decided to hide it. And once it was hidden, it grew. Soon it wasn't just one mistake. It was a chain of decisions, each worse than the last. Somewhere along the way, greed got involved. Opportunities appeared. Money was moved quietly, little by little. People who noticed were pulled into it. The situation spiraled until it became what he was seeing now. Fully planned attempt to drain company funds into private pockets. And the signature. He asked quietly. The room shifted again. The person who forged it finally spoke. "I thought I could handle it. I thought it wouldn't go this far." He stared at the person who had betrayed him, not with anger, not with revenge, but with an overwhelming sense of disappointment. "You've been with me for a long time," he said. "Why would you do this?" The person looked down at the table. "I don't have an excuse. I just made bad choices. When things got bigger, I didn't know how to stop." He didn't respond right away. He needed a moment to steady himself. "You put everyone at risk," he finally said. "Not just the company. The people who work here, the clients who trust us. Everything we built." Silence filled the room again. He gathered the documents and stepped back. "I'm taking this to the board," he said. "They deserve to know the truth, and an investigation will follow." No one tried to stop him. No one dared. He walked out of the room with calm, steady steps, even though his heart was heavy. He didn't want things to end this way. He didn't want to see someone he trusted fall so deeply. But he also knew he couldn't protect anyone from the consequences of their own actions. Later that day, he called for an emergency meeting with the board, presented everything's document, each observation, every detail. They listened in shock, in disappointment, in disbelief. Most importantly, they listened with seriousness. The board agreed immediately. A full investigation would start at once. The following days were filled with interviews, reviews, and long hours of examining files. The truth slowly unfolded piece by piece. More people were involved than he had initially believed. Some had small roles, some had bigger parts, some truly didn't know the full picture, but had seen enough to feel guilty. But one thing became crystal clear. His decision to go undercover had saved the company. If he hadn't taken that step, he hadn't walked into his own company as a simple employee, he would never have discovered the hidden cracks beneath the surface. Weeks later, after the investigation concluded, the people responsible were removed from their positions. Some faced legal consequences. Others were given a chance to make amends in ways that didn't harm anyone else. The company slowly returned to normal, though the memory of the incident stayed with everyone. Meetings were more transparent. Departments communicated more honestly. Trust was rebuilt, slowly but surely. One morning, as he stood by the window overlooking the city, he thought about everything that had happened. The disguise, the whispers, the danger, the betrayal, the truth. He didn't feel angry anymore. He didn't feel disappointed either. He felt grateful. Grateful that he had seen the reality from the ground instead of from the top. Grateful that he had understood his employees' daily struggles. Grateful that he had saved something worth protecting. He knew now that being a leader wasn't just about being in charge. It was about understanding what people feel, what they hide, what they fear, and what they hope for. And as he watched the sun rise over the buildings, he realized something else. He hadn't just tested his staff, he had tested himself, and he had learned the truth about the company, about the people in it, and about the strength it takes to face what hurts. The journey had been difficult, but it was real, and it changed everything.